Hello and welcome to First Christian Church's Adult Fellowship Bible Study. We continue in our study of the book of Isaiah from the Old Testament. Today we start a new section of that book after having finished the opening oracle and that chapters that filled in with assembled material, they say. This new section runs from first verse of chapter 6 through the first few verses of chapter 9. Scholars teach it has long been accepted as a distinct literary unit in Isaiah that sort of stands by itself and is not directly connected necessarily with the first oracle or in fact it serves more as an interruption, many would say. Several scholars actually say it is a major interruption to the beginning chapter storyline that ended there in the last verse of chapter 5. The previous storyline will pick up, however, over in the middle of, or early on, but not right at the opening of chapter 9. So this is basically sort of an independent unit. This new section is more narrative in style than the poetic style that we've been used to in Isaiah. And especially, if you'll notice in this section especially, there will be some switching back to poetry when Isaiah is speaking on behalf of God or God is speaking to Isaiah. Many scholars strongly question whether or not Isaiah of the what so-called first Isaiah, the first 39 books of Isaiah, were actually authored by Isaiah, even though at places this seems to be autobiographical. Instead, they suggest it is more likely about the tradition concerning Isaiah as a prophet. Others argue, though, it's Isaiah, not that they have any evidence that would support that argument any better than the other argument. It's just that that's their belief and they're sticking to it. Chapter 6 is related to Isaiah's commissioning, that is, calling, which we will cover today. It turns the setting back to the time of King Uzziah, who was the first king listed there in that series of 4 kings. He died in somewhere or another between 742 and 736 BC. And that also signaled kind of the end of Judah's independence, in that they had operated for several years as pretty well an independent country, doing as they liked. But now they're going to come under very strong influence from the Assyrians, and that, as will, of course, the northern 10 tribes, Israel or Samaria. So let's read chapter 6, all 13 verses, in the New Revised Standard Version. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Seraphims were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. The pivots on the threshold shook at the voice of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me! I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among the people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphims flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of thongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, Now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send? And who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. And he said, Go and say to the people, Keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the minds of this people dull, and stop their ears, and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes, and comprehend with their minds, and turn and be healed. Then I said, How long, O Lord? And he said, Until cities lie waste, without inhabitants, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a tenth part remains in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth, or the oaks whose stumps remain standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. Notice this is a call or commission for the prophet. That is a call by God. But why, if it is such not at the start of the book? Scholars wonder, especially when you look at the two sort of adjacent in time period and so forth, prophets of Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Why have editors, since this is considered to be an edited book, have not moved it to the front of the book if this, like I said, if this is an edited book? So scholars debate that. They don't have good answers for it, but they definitely wonder. And I found no agreement among why. I mean, there was lots of speculation, but everybody I looked at had a different speculation. When this chapter appears in the church lectionaries, and some churches have it and some don't, it tends to appear in year C, the Trinity Sunday, as the Old Testament material, and includes those first 8 verses only, with the key point being the 3 holies. It is also used some at the ordination and ministerial commissioning in some denominations, or at least that line, Here I am, Lord, send me. I wonder why it does not include what he was told or commissioned, if they're going to use this in the lectionary. Why it doesn't include more. Some people say probably because of a number of issues. One is it's pretty harsh. The second one is the Hebrew text. That is the text that the Bible was written in, and the Greek text, which is called the Septuagint, that those 2 versions which existed before the New Testament do not agree on what Isaiah was told to preach. And so maybe rather than covering that set of worms, they just decide we don't cover the rest of it. Why would God Lord, if you will, tell him, stop their ears, shut their eyes, and dull their minds. Translators clearly have trouble with that, so you might want to look at several translations of the Bible just to see how different translations sort of handle that wording. In some cases trying to soften it, in other cases almost confusing it even more. How could Isaiah understand or comprehend what he was actually to do? In other words, as a teacher, it comes to me, I mean, how would I go about doing that? Why would I go about it? How would you approach it and so forth? Dr. Christopher Seitz, writing from Yale Divinity School at the time, teaches this is to establish the prophet has been cleansed and set apart from the nation of Judah. The nation was considered at the time to be extremely sinful and therefore not in communication with God. God had withdrawn from them. The nation had unclean lips. It had deaf ears, closed minds. And so God's message would have been wasted on them, so to speak. Essentially, don't tell them anything except what they want to hear. To keep, which that's the condition they're already in. Just keep their minds closed, their ears closed, and their eyes shut. So Isaiah's admits his guilt here. So he is taken away. His sin is taken away, and he is then commissioned to go to these people and teach them what they do not want to hear, which will harden them even more, so to speak, that God could be that cruel to them, so to speak. Thus he is free to step forward and respond when God calls, something not available to the nation. They were not repenting, so therefore they were not hearing him. He was not calling them. Isaiah heard God and has responded. He can see, the nation cannot. He has comprehended God's message. Judah cannot. They cannot, and thus have not obeyed God. Thus Isaiah's preaching and teaching is to produce that effect on the people, that is, to continue them in that effect. Several scholars tend to say. In other words, it's not that that's the state it's going to put them in necessarily, it's the state they're already in. They will try to listen, try to see, but are unable to comprehend. One advisor says they have compromised bias. That is, they do not want to hear God's message and tune him out. They want to hear what they want to hear and not what God really has to tell them. Notice what Isaiah's response is here to this charge. In verse 11. Not that, God, how can I do this? No, Isaiah asks, how long am I to do this? God's response: until cities lie waste, uninhabited, land is desolate, until they are exiled far away. Wow. Some scholars suggest that implies this will happen while Isaiah is actually teaching. So relative to this issue of whether this is long-term prophecy for way down the road, thousands of years later, or whether it's near prophecy, it's as if this is to happen while Isaiah is prophesying to them. In verse 3, the holiness of God is stressed here, notes scholars, but that series of holiness. Isaiah envisions God is in heaven on a throne, attended by seraphims. And what are these seraphims? They are angelic beings of the highest order in Judeo-Christian tradition. They are not present to protect God. God needs no protection, but they're there to alert or warn others. Thus there they call out, "Holy, holy, holy," as a loud warning that shook everything. You're not to miss it. Their love burns for this God so hot that they produce fire and smoke. Those three holies there are sacred and often used in religious music, as many of us hear periodically in church. Notice what happens in verse 5 when Isaiah hears or envisions he is in God's presence. He admits his sin, that is, he is lost from God's way, but now sees God, the King, as his Lord, and submits. He understands. His mind was opened. He submits to God, not to man's ways, is implied here, teaches several scholars. Isaiah is overwhelmed by his sinfulness, and he atones. Therefore he can be used by God. He is purified on the lips by burning coal from God's altar. Some scholars suggest it is his lips that will be used to spread or teach God's word or God's message, thus the site of the purification. Others suggest, maybe that was where his greater sin was, what he had said, what he had been teaching in previous. And so, who knows? Regardless of why the lips were the site of purification, most scholars suggest it is a demonstration that Isaiah now is speaking for God. He is God's messenger to Judah, the people of Judah and Judah's kingship. As we read these 13 verses, it becomes clear this divine mandate remains in effect until the land is utterly desolate, even if it takes multiple invasions, notes Dr. Sykes. Some suggest this is the deportation that will occur. God is angry at them. They were in the promised land. They're going to be removed from the promised land. They no longer qualify as his people. God's anger is so kindled against these people that God is smiting them. Scholars point out to catch that verse 9 and 10 has God speaking directly to Isaiah. That is, this is his commission. The prophet is to go tell them God's judgment upon these people. Scholars say catch, it is this people. Several suggest that is very supportive of the idea that this is near-term prophecy, not some long distance away. Now, the problem of it is not all translations will translate it, this people, because some people are trying to scan it for future generations, and so they've changed the wording. But the best translation, they say, of the Hebrew that's there is this people, when you translate that into English. Most Protestant Bibles translate these verses from the Hebrew text. The Greek Septuagint text, popular in the diaspora Hebrew community at Jesus' time, reads in English though, and this is why we see these various translations. It's not going to be the same. That Greek translation, the Septuagint, that existed from about 400 BC on, okay? and was very popular in the diaspora. It's often what's quoted in Paul's writing especially. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. This people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they close their eyes. Clearly, these are not in exact agreement between the Hebrew and the Greek translation there. But this people is there in both. The final verse gives hope. It extends the hand of God, some scholars teach, and that's important to not miss. In other words, God has not fully withdrawn from them there. Right at the end you can see. But how? Not in a seed, but a sprout from the stump. The holy seed is in the stump. Scholars say this implies vegetative growth, that is, a sprout. Some Christian Bible translate footnote that this seed refers to Jesus, but several scholars argue it is referring to the stump in the previous line. Some few stumps will be left to regrow. Maybe that's referring to, for example, children born from those survivors, but not taught by those survivors. And they get exposed to new thinking, new thought, and a tone. Dr. Eugene Tucker, writing at the time from Emory University, taught, although in churches, they use the holy, holy, holy verses to support Trinity. He said it's important for us to keep in mind that this is not Trinity here that's being referred to, a doctrine that did not arise until well after the whole Bible, both the New and the Old Testament, had been written and used for years. It is written here in Isaiah as a warning, he says, a 3x warning. That's his point as he closes out his opinion there on commentary on that chapter. This is tough. This is tough read, tough message. As one preaching scholar said, it's so often avoided because we Christians don't want to hear it. I think there's food for thought there too, that we don't read it because we don't like the message. Hope this gives you some idea of how some of the lead scholars look at this area, and have a good Bible study, and we'll hope to catch you in another lesson.